So this is my current long distance vehicle. It's a Tricycle 700 with a direct drive rear motor there. And it's got reasonably good range, about 70 miles on a 48 volt, 17.5 amp hour battery, I think it is. Right around 850 watt hours. But I want to get better range, so we're gonna take the 325 watt solar panel there, and we're gonna hook it up to this thing. But obviously we need a mounting system for that. I 3D printed some sockets, one up here, two back here, that are going to hold some aluminum 1-inch bar stock. Then we'll mount that guy as a canopy. All right. After a quick run down to the hardware store, we've got the cross posts in place. We're ready to drill the holes at the ends of the cross posts and install the panel. Here it is all assembled. We've got the cross braces here and up at the front. Those seem to be working pretty well. And we've got what is this, 16th inch cable with turnbuckles, keeping everything nice and tight. I mean, there's still definitely some wobble there, but a lot of that is actually in the tires. So we'll see how it behaves when we've actually got it on the road tomorrow. Okay. Unfortunately, the front bracket is not holding up, which correct.
Yeah, that's the crack, huh?
Sort of makes sense though. It's in a really weird, precarious position. Oh well. So here we have these lightweight panels. They weigh about 1/3 as much as the other ones per unit of power. And so we're making a rack to put those on here out of aluminum bar stock primarily. So there were a couple of issues with the previous bracket design that I think I've managed to remedy. The first was that the previous bracket had a socket that the square aluminum tubing slotted into. And that was a bad design because the 3D printed plastic has very low tensile strength. So if you have the aluminum bar socketed into a tube made out of the 3D printed ABS PETG in this case, then any kind of torque on that can just split the socket wide open, but along the layer lines usually. So that was no good. What's much better is having a 3D printed plug inside the aluminum socket. Because the square aluminum tubing is hollow, it can form the socket. It compresses the layers of plastic together and actually makes them stronger. The second thing is that, again, because the 3D printed plastic doesn't have great tensile strength, when we had the hose clamps going through the 3D printed plastic and then the aluminum socketing into it, the hose clamp strong, the aluminum strong, the 3D printed plastic in between was a major weak point because any kind of flexion forward and backwards would cause it to crack and split. So I cut slots in the aluminum tubing, and now the hose clamp goes through the aluminum tubing, around the 3D printed bracket that holds it in place, and connects at the hose clamps nut portion, worm drive portion, whatever you call it. All right, here it is, ready to rock. Ready for the first trip out. We've got 400 watts, running at about 70 volts, which right now is being horribly inefficient because it's dumping into my 48 volt battery, but we're going to unhook that and run it just on the solar panels for this first run. We'll see how far we make it today. I'm not sure how far I'm going to go, but I'm excited to see how this goes. The ride that I took that day ended up being just over 50 miles on rough terrain. A lot of rural roads, some of them not even paved, and the rack held up very well in spite of the rather extreme vibration. The dramatically lighter panels and much stronger mounting brackets made a big difference, given that the previous design had suffered complete structural failure after only 7 miles of relatively smooth road. I was able to monitor all of the electrical energy on the bike going through the motor, through the power computer, and was also able to get a rough estimate from Strava of how much total energy was required to move the vehicle from point A to point B, accounting for speed and elevation gain. This estimate is intended for a standard road bicycle, and doesn't account for the much greater weight and aerodynamic drag of my vehicle, so I suspect it's a very conservative estimate. I started the battery about half full, a bold choice in retrospect, and ended up using 930 watt-hours for the trip, substantially more than the battery could have provided even if it started out full to the brim. Strava estimated that the whole trip took 2.4 kilowatt-hours of energy, meaning that about 62% of the energy for the trip came from me. Based on the starting and final battery levels, about 1/3 of the total electricity for the trip was supplied by the battery, and 2/3 was generated during the trip. My 1.5 kilowatt-hour contribution sounds pretty impressive until you realize that's only about one hearty cheeseburger's worth of energy, so it's not so crazy after all. Ultimately, the panels were a good success, given the time of year, though a maximum power point tracker is definitely necessary to take full advantage of my array.